They started laughing before she even reached the table. It wasn't loud at first, just the kind of quiet snickers that crawl under your skin. A few sideways glances, a whisper passed between two recruits, then another. By the time she stopped walking, the laughter had found its confidence. Eyes lingered on the ink climbing from her wrists to her neck, black lines and faded symbols peeking out from beneath a worn denim jacket. In a room full of crisp uniforms and polished boots, she looked like a mistake that had wandered in by accident. She didn't flinch. Her name was Lina Morales, and she'd learned a long time ago that flinching only fed the wolves. The base auditorium buzzed with conversation as families, officers, and enlisted personnel filled the seats. This was supposed to be a formal event, an awards briefing, followed by a short speech from the visiting SEAL commander. Most people were here for tradition, for pride, for the comfort of seeing strength neatly pressed into uniform seams. Lina hadn't planned to be here at all. She was only there because her younger brother had begged her to come. "Just sit with me," he'd said over the phone. "Please, I want you there." So she came. And now, as she stood alone near the aisle, every eye seemed to be asking the same question: what is she doing here? One of the younger sailors leaned back in his chair and muttered just loud enough, "This a tattoo convention now?" A few laughed. Someone else shook their head. "She looks lost." Lina heard all of it. She always did. She slid into an empty seat in the back row and folded her hands in her lap. The ink on her fingers, dates, names, coordinates, caught the overhead lights. Each mark carried a memory she never talked about. Each one had been earned the hard way. But none of that mattered to the room. All they saw was a woman who didn't belong. The lights dimmed. The chatter softened. The event began. The master of ceremonies spoke about honor, about service, about sacrifice. Lina listened quietly, her gaze drifting to the stage, then to the exit signs, then back to the crowd. Her brother sat 3 rows ahead, shoulders stiff, jaw tight. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't looked back either. When the SEAL commander finally entered, the room shifted. Conversations died instantly. Chairs straightened. Spines aligned. The man moved with a calm authority that didn't need volume. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform immaculate. Silver threaded through his hair, and his eyes carried the weight of decades spent in places most people only saw in movies. "Attention on deck," someone called. Everyone stood. Everyone except Lina, not because she was disrespectful, but because her knees no longer locked the way they used to. Metal and scarred tissue didn't care much for ceremony. She remained seated, back straight, eyes forward. A few heads turned. Someone scoffed. The laughter didn't return, but the judgment did. The commander stepped onto the stage, acknowledged the salute, and began his address. His voice was steady, measured, the kind that didn't rush because it didn't need to prove anything. Halfway through his speech, his eyes drifted. They landed on Lina. At first, no one noticed. But then he paused, just for a fraction of a second. Long enough to matter. His gaze sharpened, scanning her face, then her hands, then the ink that wrapped around her forearms like old battle maps. Something shifted in his expression, recognition, maybe. Or memory. The room held its breath without knowing why. The commander stopped speaking. He stepped away from the podium. Whispers rippled through the audience. Confusion replaced confidence. No one understood what was happening, until he reached the edge of the stage and turned fully toward the back row. Toward her. Lina felt it before she saw it. That old, familiar sensation, the quiet before everything changes. She looked up and met his eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the SEAL commander raised his hand and saluted. The room froze. It wasn't a casual gesture. It was sharp, precise, the kind of salute given only when respect runs deeper than rank. Conversations died in their throats. The same people who had laughed now stared in open disbelief. Slowly, with effort, Lina stood. Her body protested, but she ignored it. She returned the salute. Not perfectly, not prettily, but honestly. Her hand trembled just slightly, and she didn't hide it. The commander held the salute for a full second longer than required. Then he lowered his hand. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. Lina swallowed. "Didn't expect to be," she replied. A murmur swept through the crowd. Her brother had turned fully around now, eyes wide, heart pounding. The commander nodded once. "For those of you wondering," he said, turning back to the audience, "you're looking at someone who saved my life." Shock rippled like a wave. "Her name is Lina Morales," he continued. "Former operator. Callsign Raven. One of the finest warriors I've ever served with. The laughter was gone now, burned away by shame. She doesn't wear the uniform anymore, he said. Not because she couldn't, but because some battles follow you home. And sometimes, surviving them costs more than dying ever would. The room was silent. No one dared breathe. I've watched this woman walk through fire, the commander went on. I've watched her carry wounded men twice her size under enemy fire. I've watched her make impossible choices so others could live with the consequences. He looked back at Lena. His voice softened. You were always stronger than you believed. Lena's chest tightened. The faces in the room blurred. For years, she had carried her service like a secret, something heavy and fragile she didn't trust the world with. She'd learned that people preferred their heroes clean, unbroken, easy to admire. She had never been any of those things. The commander returned to the stage, but the room was changed. When he finished his speech, the applause was different, slower, heavier, sincere. Afterward, people approached her carefully. Some apologized, some just nodded, unable to find words. A few looked at her ink differently now, tracing the lines with new understanding. Her brother reached her last. I didn't know, he whispered. She smiled faintly. I didn't want you to. He hugged her anyway, tight, proud. As the crowd thinned, the commander stopped beside her once more. You okay? He asked. She exhaled. Yeah, I think so. He nodded. You earned every mark they laughed at. Lena glanced down at her tattoos. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the urge to hide them. Because that day wasn't about proving who she had been. It was about reminding everyone, including herself, that strength doesn't always look the way people expect. Sometimes it looks like survival. Sometimes it looks like scars. Sometimes it looks like a woman standing alone while the world laughs, until the truth stands up with her. And when it does, even the loudest room knows when to fall silent.